Every high school has its legends, but these are real. A missing student, a ghostly cheerleader, and a night in detention that no one could ever explain. Once you hear these stories, you'll never look at your school the same way. Watch to the end. The truth is more terrifying than fiction. The latest viral TikTok claimed Riverside High was haunted by students' darkest secrets. Like most social media trends, it seemed ridiculous until that fateful Monday detention when 3 students discovered the truth was far worse than any online theory. Elliot Reeves slumped in his chair at the back of room 237, hood pulled low over his dark eyes. 2 rows ahead, Maya Chan obsessively reorganized her perfectly aligned pencils, while Zane Mitchell drummed his fingers against his desk, already fidgeting after just 10 minutes of confinement. The autumn sunset cast long shadows through the dusty windows, painting the classroom in shades of amber and crimson. Mr. Fisher's stern voice had made it clear: no phones, no talking, no leaving until 7 p.m. He'd confiscated their devices before receiving what appeared to be an urgent call. "Stay put," he'd warned, his expression unusually tense. "I'll be right back. Anyone who leaves this room will face suspension." The students watched him hurry down the hallway toward the staff room, his footsteps echoing against the lockers. The 3 students, connected only by their mutual misfortune, marinated in uncomfortable silence. Maya's pristine academic record had been marred by a single moment of weakness. Earlier that day, Mrs. Patterson had questioned the originality of her English essay, a carefully crafted analysis of the yellow wallpaper that had taken Maya weeks to perfect. The accusation of plagiarism had caused something to snap inside her, unleashing a torrent of tears and accusations that left her teacher stunned and her classmates whispering. Zane's offense seemed more in character for the class clown. Desperate to pass advanced biology, he'd stolen his lab partner's meticulously documented project notes. The theft might have gone unnoticed if he hadn't accidentally left his name on one of the photocopied pages. His usual easy smile had vanished when Mr. Fisher caught him trying to dispose of the evidence. Elliot's crime was simpler: 3 weeks of skipped classes spent smoking behind the gymnasium. The administration had finally caught up with him, though they remained unaware of the real reason he'd been avoiding school. The fresh bruises hidden beneath his hoodie told a story he refused to share. The wall clock ticked steadily toward 5 p.m. when the first anomaly occurred. The minute hand began to spin counterclockwise, accelerating until it became a blur. The fluorescent lights flickered violently, and the temperature plummeted until their breath fogged in the air. A thunderous metallic clang reverberated through the building, sending all 3 students bolting upright. They hesitated at first, Mr. Fisher's warning still fresh in their minds. But when an inhuman wail echoed through the hallway, survival instinct overcame their fear of punishment. Maya reached the door first, her hand trembling as she grasped the handle. The corridor outside no longer resembled the familiar halls of Riverside High. The walls seemed to pulse with dark veins, like ink spreading through wet paper. Shadow-like impressions of faces pressed against the surfaces, their mouths moving in silent screams. During one of their attempts to navigate the twisted corridors, they passed the staff room. Through its frosted glass window, they glimpsed a terrifying tableau. Mr. Fisher stood frozen mid-stride, his face contorted in an expression of primal fear, one hand reaching toward the door. He appeared more like a wax statue than a living being, trapped in a moment of dawning horror. Their calls received no response, and the door refused to budge, as if it existed in a different dimension entirely. The next hour passed in a blur of increasingly disturbing encounters. Words of guilt and shame appeared on surfaces moments after they looked away, each phrase eerily specific to their hidden fears. Shadows moved against the laws of physics, reaching toward them with tendrils that whispered their deepest regrets. The temperature continued to drop until frost crystallized on the windows, obscuring the setting sun. At precisely 6 p.m., reality fractured again. The clock's reverse spiral transported them back to their original seats, but subtle changes marked each reset. A dark stain spread across Elliot's desk, forming words only he could read. The classroom walls began to weep a black substance that moved against gravity. Their attempts to escape only led them in circles, each hallway eventually returning them to room 237. In the school library, they discovered hundreds of confessions carved into the wooden tables, each telling stories of guilt, regret, and shame that stretched back decades. The weight of thousands of buried truths seemed to press against them like a physical force. As they read, they began to understand the school itself had become a vessel for every suppressed secret, every hidden truth, every buried shame. And now, something born from that collective darkness had awakened, hungry for their own carefully guarded confessions. Each time the clock reset, the school twisted further into a nightmare. Whatever hunted them stayed just out of view, growing bolder as it fed on their fear and guilt. Zane broke first. One moment he was walking down the hall with the others, the next he stood alone in the dark gym. Emergency lights sputtered on, revealing the bleachers packed with twisted versions of his classmates. Their laughter bounced off the walls until it hurt his ears. "Look, everyone," the crowd jeered. The cheater finally got caught. Papers whirled around him like leaves in a storm, every assignment he'd copied, every test he'd peeked at, every shortcut he'd taken. Years of faking his way through school slapped him in the face, each page a reminder of why he hid behind jokes and easy smiles. Maya's turn came in the library. She ran between the shelves, trying to escape the avalanche of books crashing down around her. Pages flew past, covered in red marks highlighting every phrase she'd stolen, every idea she'd claimed as her own. In the shadows, her parents stared at her with cold disappointment, their perfect daughter exposed as a fraud. For Elliot, the past came rushing back like a punch to the gut. He stood frozen, forced to watch himself abandon Derek to his brother's gang. The sounds were the worst part. Flesh hitting flesh, Derek calling his name, his own footsteps as he ran away. The coward's choice he'd buried under months of skipped classes and silent rage. They found each other again in room 237, but they weren't alone. The thing that had been stalking them finally showed itself, a mass of writhing shadows that spoke with their own voices, mocking them with their deepest shames. Then something changed. Watching Zane crack under the weight of his self-loathing, Maya spoke up. She told him about the crushing pressure, about feeling like a fake. Elliot joined in, finally talking about Derek, about his brother, about why he really ditched school. With each confession, the shadow thing seemed to lose its grip on reality. It flickered like bad reception, its form going fuzzy around the edges. Their secrets, dragged into the open, weren't feeding it anymore. The air around Elliot started to shimmer. He'd done more than just confess. He'd accepted his past, owned it completely. The shadow creature hissed and recoiled. The clock struck 6 p.m. one last time. Its hands spun like a broken compass before stopping dead. Mr. Fisher burst through the door mid-stride as if nothing had happened, but his eyes were different. He'd seen something out there in the dark. Things changed after that night, but in quiet ways. The school's shadows didn't press so close anymore. That suffocating feeling of buried secrets eased up. Elliot was still Elliot, mostly, except now he could tell when someone carried the kind of weight they'd face down. Kids having rough times started drifting to room 237. They'd find Elliot there sometimes, even when he should have been somewhere else. He didn't say much, but that wasn't what they needed. Just someone who understood what it was like to carry something heavy. Maya and Zane stuck close by. They were the only ones who remembered everything, but that was enough. They'd learned something that night, not about ghosts or monsters, but about the things people hide from themselves, and how facing them together beats facing them alone. The broken clock stayed broken. Sometimes it ticked backwards in the late afternoon sun, but nobody ran from that sound anymore. They'd figured out the truth. Secrets only have power when you face them alone in the dark. It was another grueling Tuesday practice in the Ridgewood High Gym. The scent of sweat mixed with the lingering aroma of old wood varnish. The squad had been running pyramid drills for over an hour, and Hannah Grayson, the team captain, clapped her hands to keep everyone focused. "Come on, Megan, tighten those ankles," she yelled. Megan Alvarez groaned but obeyed, wobbling as she tried to hold her pose. The rest of the squad giggled softly. Hannah sighed. This was supposed to be an elite squad, but without Courtney Fletcher, Ridgewood's star flyer, everything felt half-baked. The irony was unbearable. Ridgewood High had hosted a memorial for Courtney just months ago. Her car accident had shattered the team. A whole year later, the ache of her absence still hung in the air like a stubborn ghost. Hannah turned to grab her water bottle when the gym doors creaked open. "Hey, Coach!" she called out, expecting the usual drop-in. But Coach Bennett wasn't standing in the doorway. The bottle slipped from Hannah's hand and clattered to the floor. Courtney Fletcher stood in the entrance, dressed in her Ridgewood cheer uniform, hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights. She didn't look tired or beaten down. She looked perfect, almost radiant. The team froze, their faces mirroring the shock Hannah felt. No one moved as Courtney walked in, her footsteps unnaturally soft, her smile wide. "Hey, guys," Courtney said, her voice light, like she'd just returned from a weekend vacation. Megan dropped her pom-poms with a loud thud. "Is this some kind of joke?" "It's me," Courtney said, spreading her arms. "I'm back." The silence was heavy, broken only by the hum of the overhead lights. Then, almost simultaneously, the girls rushed forward, squealing and hugging her. Hannah didn't move. Her feet stayed rooted to the floor as she stared at Courtney's impossibly familiar face. Courtney wasn't just back. She looked exactly the same. No scars, no signs of anything. It wasn't just unnatural. It was impossible. The chaos finally calmed when Coach Bennett entered the gym, his whistle cutting through the noise. His face went slack when he saw Courtney. What's going on here?" Courtney laughed. "Long story, Coach, but I'm ready to get back on the squad." "Courtney," Coach said, voice trembling, "you've been gone." "I know," Courtney interrupted, her smile faltering slightly. "I know it's been a year. I don't really remember much, but I'm here now. Isn't that what matters?" The next week passed in a haze of confusion and excitement. The school erupted with gossip as Courtney reintegrated into her old life. She rejoined practices, acing stunts and flips as though no time had passed. In fact, she seemed better, more agile, more precise. "Courtney's back and better than ever," Megan chirped one afternoon. Hannah didn't share the enthusiasm. She noticed how Courtney never talked about the accident or the year she'd been gone. Worse, she noticed strange details, like how Courtney always avoided mirrors, or how her shadow seemed to lag slightly behind her movements during stretches. Late one night, Hannah's unease became unbearable. She drove to Courtney's house, parking a block away to avoid attention. The Fletcher home was dark except for a faint glow from Courtney's bedroom. Hannah slipped around the side of the house and peered through the window. Inside, Courtney sat cross-legged on the floor, her back to the window. She was whispering something, a low, guttural sound that didn't resemble any language Hannah had ever heard. Something moved in the corner of the room, just out of the light's reach. Hannah's breath hitched as she saw the shadow stretch unnaturally, pooling toward Courtney like liquid ink. Courtney's head snapped around. Her eyes locked onto Hannah, and for a split second, her face didn't look like Courtney's at all. Her jaw was too wide, her eyes too black. Hannah stumbled back, nearly tripping over a garden gnome as she fled to her car. At practice the next day, Courtney was perfect again, her smile bright and unshakable. "You okay, Hannah?" Courtney asked during a break. Her voice was as sweet as ever, but something in her gaze felt like a challenge. "I'm fine," Hannah lied, but she wasn't fine. She could feel Courtney watching her, always just a little too closely. Worse accidents started happening. A junior broke her wrist during a pyramid. Megan's car wouldn't start after practice, and she found deep scratches running down the hood. Hannah began to wonder if Courtney's return wasn't a miracle, but a curse. That night, Hannah woke to her phone vibrating. A text from Megan flashed on the screen. "You up? Something's wrong with Courtney." Hannah bolted upright and typed back, "What do you mean?" The reply came instantly, "She's outside my house." Smiling, Hannah felt her stomach drop as another text came through, this one accompanied by a photo. It was dark and grainy, but unmistakably Courtney, standing under Megan's bedroom window, staring up with a wide, toothy grin. Hannah grabbed her car keys without thinking. She didn't even bother putting on shoes, sprinting out into the cool night air and jumping into her car. As she drove, Megan sent more texts. "She's still there. She's not moving. I think she's waiting for me to come outside. Hurry." Hannah's knuckles turned white on the steering wheel as she sped through Ridgewood's quiet streets. When she reached Megan's house, her headlights swept over Courtney standing in the yard. She was still in her cheer uniform, her blonde hair gleaming unnaturally under the streetlights. Her head tilted as the car approached, her smile never wavering. Hannah honked, but Courtney didn't flinch. "Get back inside," Hannah texted Megan. Then she stepped out of the car. "Courtney?" Hannah called, her voice shaking. Courtney didn't answer. She just stood there, her grin widening until it seemed to stretch too far. "You're scaring everyone," Hannah said, taking a cautious step forward. Courtney tilted her head the other way, the motion jerky and unnatural. "Am I?" she asked, her voice sweet but hollow. "I thought we were friends." Hannah's heart pounded. "We are. That's why I need to know the truth. What's happening to you?" Courtney's smile faltered. For the first time, her eyes looked sad. "I didn't want this, Hannah," she whispered. "But it followed me. I didn't have a choice." "What followed you?" Before Courtney could answer, Megan's front door creaked open. "Megan, stay inside," Hannah yelled. But it was too late. Megan stood in the doorway, her face pale and terrified. "She's lying," Megan said. "She's not Courtney." Courtney's body jerked violently, her limbs twisting unnaturally. When she straightened, her face was completely wrong. Her mouth too wide, her eyes black and hollow. "I liked being Courtney," the thing said, its voice a guttural rasp. "But I'm tired of pretending." Megan screamed, slamming the door shut as Courtney lunged. Hannah barely had time to react, diving into her car and fumbling for her phone. The headlights illuminated Courtney's inhuman form as she stalked toward the house. Her movements were jerky but fast, her shadow rippling unnaturally behind her. Hannah's hands shook as she called the police, but when the operator answered, she couldn't find the words to explain what was happening. "There's something," she stammered. Before she could finish, the line went dead. Hannah slammed the car into reverse, the tires screeching as she backed up the street. She honked frantically, trying to distract Courtney from Megan's house. It worked. Courtney turned toward the car, her head tilting unnaturally again. Then, in a blur, she sprinted toward the vehicle. Hannah floored it, narrowly missing Courtney as she sped away. Her rearview mirror showed the thing standing in the middle of the street, watching her go. Back at her own house, Hannah locked every door and window. She grabbed a kitchen knife and sat in the living room, staring at her phone. A text came through from Megan. "She's gone." Hannah replied, "Are you okay?" No response. She tried calling, but it went straight to voicemail. The next day at practice, Courtney was back, smiling and flawless as ever. "Hey, Hannah," she said cheerfully. Hannah froze. She glanced at Megan, who stood stiffly at the edge of the mat, her face pale. Courtney noticed Hannah's hesitation and tilted her head, just like the night before. "What's wrong?" "You know what's wrong," Hannah whispered. Courtney's smile faded, replaced by an icy glare. "If you want to talk, we can. But don't try to turn them against me," she said, her voice low and menacing. That night, Hannah went to the library, digging through Old Town records. She found an article about a fire at a funeral home years ago. The bodies had been improperly buried, and one of the urns had been stolen. The name Courtney Fletcher was written in the margins of the report, as if someone had added it later. She turned the page and found a list of local legends. One caught her eye, the Shadow Taker. Hannah went straight to Megan's house after practice, her mind racing with everything she'd learned. Megan answered the door, but something was wrong. Her movements were stiff, her smile too wide. "Come in," Megan said. Hannah hesitated. "Where's your mom?" "She's not here," Megan said, stepping aside. "But Courtney is." Before Hannah could react, Courtney appeared behind Megan. Her black eyes glinted as she grabbed Megan by the shoulders, jerking her head back. Hannah screamed and ran, but the last thing she heard was Megan's voice, deeper and darker than it should have been. "It's your turn now, Hannah." Marcus Chun watched his breath form small clouds in the darkening hallway of Hawthorne High. 6 hours until dawn. 6 hours to prove he wasn't afraid of some ridiculous urban legend about a janitor's closet. He adjusted his backpack, heavy with snacks, a portable charger, and his laptop. The empty school felt different after hours, larger somehow, as if the shadows between classrooms had stretched the hallways into unfamiliar proportions. His footsteps echoed off the lockers, each click of his shoes announcing his presence to whatever might be listening. "Stop it," he chided himself. "There's nothing listening because there's nothing here." 3 weeks at Hawthorne High, and already he'd managed to get himself locked in overnight. But what choice did he have? When Amber Richardson, student body president, early admission to Yale and gatekeeper to the school's social hierarchy, had challenged him at lunch, the entire cafeteria went silent. "If you're so sure it's just a closet," she'd said, her perfect smile never wavering. "Prove it, one night inside. Do that, and I'll personally write you a recommendation letter for Stanford. We all will." She gestured to her circle of friends, the yearbook staff, debate team captains, honor society presidents. The exact connections he needed. Marcus had transferred too late in his senior year. His perfect GPA and test scores weren't enough anymore. He needed to stand out. One uncomfortable night was worth it for 6 glowing recommendations from Hawthorne's elite. The third-floor hallway seemed to absorb his flashlight beam. Room 347, 348. There. A simple wooden door marked maintenance, nestled between 2 banks of lockers. No ancient runes. No mysterious stains. Just a plain door with peeling paint. Marcus pulled out his phone and hit record. "Day 0 of the Great Closet Experiment," he narrated, panning across the door. "About to debunk Hawthorne High's favorite ghost story. Current time is 6:42 p.m. He tried the handle. Locked. Amber had promised to leave it open. Unless... no, she wouldn't have set him up. He tried again, and this time the door swung inward with a prolonged creak. The closet was bigger than he'd expected. Much bigger. His flashlight revealed industrial metal shelving stretching back at least 20 feet, crammed with cleaning supplies, old sports equipment, and boxes of what looked like school records. The air had a sharp chemical smell underneath a thick layer of dust. "Cozy," Marcus muttered, stepping inside. The door clicked shut behind him. He set up his camp near the entrance. Sleeping bag, snacks, drinks, and electronics. The closet's single bulb cast a sickly yellow glow that left the deeper shelves in shadow. Perfect horror movie ambience. He could already imagine Amber's face when he showed her his overnight video log. To pass the time, Marcus decided to explore. The shelves closer to the door held recent items, modern cleaning supplies, spare parts for smartboards, boxes labeled with dates from the past decade. But as he moved deeper, the items grew older. Analog clock parts, mimeograph supplies, yearbooks from the 1960s. He pulled one down at random. Hawthorne High 1964. The pages were brittle but intact. He flipped through candid photos of beehive hairdos and Letterman jackets until something made him stop. The staff section showed a familiar face. A thin man with deep-set eyes and a rigid smile. James Morton Maintenance. Marcus grabbed another yearbook, this one from 1978. Same face, same position, same unnerving smile. Not a relative, the photo was identical. Must be a printing mistake, he thought. But his hands were already reaching for a 1985 edition. Same photo. 1992. Same photo. 2003. His phone chimed, 9 p.m. The sound seemed muffled, as if the shelves were absorbing it. Was it getting colder? The overhead bulb flickered once, twice, and the shadows shifted against the walls like living things. It's just an old electrical system, Marcus told himself. Old buildings make weird noises. Temperature drops at night. Everything has a logical explanation. Then he heard the humming. It was faint at first, barely distinguishable from the building's ambient noise. But it grew clearer, a melody he almost recognized, coming from somewhere behind the shelves. And underneath it, another sound. A rhythmic scratching, like fingernails on concrete. Marcus's phone flashlight caught something metallic behind the last row of shelves. He squinted, stepped closer. It looked like hinges? He pressed his hand against the wall, and a section of painted concrete swung inward with surprising ease. The opening revealed a narrow tunnel sloping down into darkness. The humming was louder now, mixed with what sounded like running water. Against every instinct, Marcus ducked through the doorway. His scientific mind insisted there must be a maintenance tunnel system, probably connecting to the boiler room. The passage twisted downward, the walls changing from concrete to rough-hewn stone. Water dripped somewhere ahead. His phone's battery indicator dropped from 82% to 45% in seconds. The tunnel opened into a large chamber that definitely wasn't on any school blueprint. Industrial spotlights on tripods illuminated a series of white photography backdrops. Professional cameras on stands pointed at empty chairs. The walls were covered in photographs, hundreds of them, carefully arranged in chronological order. Marcus stepped closer, his heart pounding. The first photos showed students from different decades, all posed normally at first. But each subsequent photo of the same student showed increasing terror. Wide eyes, silent screams. The final photos in each series were just empty chairs. His phone died with a sudden finality, plunging him into darkness. Somewhere in the blackness, a door scraped open. Footsteps approached, accompanied by that same cheerful humming. And then the lights came on. Marcus spun around, blinking in the sudden brightness. The chamber was empty. The footsteps had stopped, but their echo lingered in the damp air, as if the very walls were remembering them. A new sound drew his attention, water splashing. Following it led him deeper into the chamber, past more photography equipment, light meters, developing trays, and chemicals he recognized from his own darkroom experience. The setup was professional, methodical. This was no impromptu lair. Someone had been working here for years. The water sounds led to a series of metal sinks. Above them, clotheslined photographs hung drying. Marcus's blood ran cold. These were recent. He recognized Jessica Walsh, a freshman who'd stopped coming to school last month. The official story was that she'd transferred. But here she was, her expression changing across 6 photos from confusion to dawning horror. A drawer squeaked open behind him. Marcus ducked behind a partition wall. Through a crack, he watched the janitor, the same man from those yearbook photos, carefully arrange photographic paper in the drawer. The man hadn't aged a day since 1964. His movements were precise, almost graceful, like a choreographed dance he'd performed countless times. "I can smell your fear, Mr. Chen," the janitor said without looking up. "It has a particular quality. The fear of the rational mind encountering the impossible. So much sweeter than simple animal terror." Marcus ran back through the tunnels, his hands scraping against rough stone, his breathing so loud it seemed to fill the passage. The hidden door was still open. He burst through it into the closet, slammed it shut, and scrambled for the exit. The main door wouldn't budge. "The recommendations were real, you know," came Amber's voice from the other side. "Everyone who survives gets to join us. Their letters help bring in next year's candidate." "Survives?" Marcus pressed his back against the shelves. "What are you talking about?" "Fear sustains him," Amber continued. "Young fear specifically. Fresh fear. One student a year, carefully selected and cultivated. But he's also an artist. He needs to document the progression. From disbelief to understanding. From confidence to despair. Heavy footsteps approached from the tunnel. The janitor's humming grew louder. "You have two choices, Marcus," Amber said. "Feed him or join him. Your analytical mind, your perfect GPA. You'd be an excellent addition to our little society. Just think of all the future candidates you could help select." The humming stopped. A hand fell on Marcus's shoulder. "What's it going to be?" the janitor asked. "The camera or the chair?" Marcus closed his eyes. Thought of Stanford, of his future, of all the nameless faces in those photographs. He turned around. "The camera," he whispered. "Teach me." 3 months later, Marcus Chun sat in the photography club room, reviewing portfolio submissions. A new transfer student had just enrolled, Sarah Zhang. Straight A's, ambitious, no connections. Perfect. He picked up his camera and smiled. There was an art to capturing fear after all. The way hope drained from the eyes. The moment belief in a rational world shattered. The precise instant when they realized no one was coming to save them. The janitor, his mentor now, had taught him well. In the darkroom, Marcus hung his latest series. Jessica's final photo had turned out beautifully. Soon, it would join the others in the chamber, and Sarah's sequence would begin. The cycle would continue as it had for decades. He hummed softly as he worked, the same tune that had drawn him deeper into the tunnels that night. The chemicals smelled like home now, like belonging, like power. Outside his darkroom, Hawthorne High buzzed with normal activity. Students rushed to class, worried about grades and gossip and college applications. None of them noticed how the yearbook staff watched from the sidelines, how the Honor Society presidents measured their reactions, how the student body's elite had earned their positions. And if anyone wondered about the old janitor's closet, they knew better than to ask. Some doors, after all, were better left closed. Some mysteries better left unsolved, until it was their turn to learn the truth. Prom season descended on Middleton High like a fever, infecting every conversation. The hallways hummed with gossip about dates and outfits, while glittering flyers for dress sales and tux rentals adorned every bulletin board. For Emily Carson, all the buzz was a reminder of everything she didn't have. A glittering dress, a charming date, or a place in the social spotlight. She wasn't bitter. Not really. She'd always been content in her quiet life, keeping her head down and moving unnoticed through the currents of high school. But something about this being her senior year stirred a faint, stubborn ache. She wasn't sure what it was, pride, curiosity, or just the gnawing thought that she might regret not going. Whatever the reason, Emily decided she'd be at that prom, even if she had to find a way to scrape it all together herself. Her search led her to the thrift store on Willow Street. The store smelled faintly of mothballs and dust, with dim yellow lighting casting long shadows over racks of mismatched clothing. The dresses were shoved together with little care, crumpled tulle and faded sequins hanging limply. Just as Emily was about to leave, her fingers brushed over something smooth and cold. She pulled it out, revealing a gown that looked entirely out of place in the shabby shop. Midnight blue with delicate star-like embroidery, the dress shimmered faintly, almost as if it caught light that wasn't there. The fabric felt unnaturally soft, almost alive beneath her fingertips. Emily couldn't believe her luck. Fit perfectly. Standing in front of the cracked mirror at the back of the store, she barely recognized herself. Her plain features seemed sharper, her figure more graceful. It was as though the dress transformed her into someone entirely new. At home, the dress became the centerpiece of Emily's preparations. She hung it on the back of her closet door, where it seemed to cast a strange glow across the room. The sight of it was thrilling and oddly comforting. But over the next few days, the dress began to exert an unspoken presence in Emily's life. It was subtle at first. When she walked through the halls at school, people seemed to notice her more. Friends who barely acknowledged her before stopped to compliment her hair or her smile. Ryan Thompson, the star quarterback, even offered a casual wave. Emily felt herself changing, too. Confidence bubbled up in her where self-doubt once lived. It was intoxicating, this newfound sense of being seen. Still, there were moments that gave her pause. Sometimes, when she glanced at the dress from the corner of her eye, it seemed to shift ever so slightly, as if it had moved. At night, she dreamed vividly of shadows and soft whispers she couldn't quite understand. The whispers became impossible to ignore. They started as faint murmurs, barely louder than the rustling of leaves, but grew more insistent as the days passed. They came at odd times, when Emily was brushing her hair, folding her laundry, or drifting off to sleep. With the whispers came flashes of imagery, like fragmented dreams. She saw herself standing under a spotlight, her dress glimmering like starlight, surrounded by faces she couldn't place. They seemed to watch her with reverence, but there was something else in their eyes. Hunger. The visions followed her into her waking hours. Passing by reflective surfaces, Emily occasionally caught glimpses of herself in the dress, even when she wasn't wearing it. Her reflection would smile when she wasn't smiling, or linger a second longer after she moved away. Emily tried to dismiss it all as pre-prom jitters, but a faint unease began to creep into her thoughts. The week before prom, Emily noticed changes in her surroundings. Her room felt colder, even with the heater running. Lights flickered unpredictably, and small items, her hairbrush, her phone, would shift positions as if moved by an unseen hand. She began to feel watched. At night, she swore she could feel eyes on her, though no one was there. Her sleep became restless, interrupted by the same recurring dream. A girl twirling in the same midnight blue dress, her movements graceful and hypnotic. The girl's face was a blur, but her hands, slender and pale, were smeared with something dark and glistening. As the days passed, the whispers turned to voices, no longer soft but commanding, though she couldn't make out the words. Her reflection grew stranger, her mirrored self staring at her with a knowing, almost mocking expression. But despite the growing unease, Emily found herself unable to part with the dress. Something about it called to her, a magnetic pull she couldn't resist. When she looked at it, hanging in her room like a prize, her fears seemed to fade. The dress was her ticket to being seen, to belonging. Prom was only days away. Whatever strange feelings lingered, Emily told herself, they didn't matter. She was going to shine. Prom night arrived with a buzz of excitement. Emily stood in front of her bedroom mirror, gazing at her reflection. The midnight blue dress hugged her frame perfectly, its embroidered stars catching the soft glow of her desk lamp. She had curled her hair and applied a touch of makeup, transforming herself into someone even she barely recognized. The unease from the past week seemed to melt away under the anticipation of the evening. Whatever strange occurrences had followed her, she told herself, were just the jitters. Tonight, she was going to leave her old, invisible self behind. When her mom saw her, she gasped. "You look beautiful," she said, though her voice wavered slightly, as if she'd seen something else in Emily's reflection. Emily brushed it off and left for the prom. The gymnasium had been transformed into a shimmering wonderland of fairy lights and silk drapes. Couples twirled on the dance floor while clusters of friends laughed by the punch table. When Emily stepped through the doors, a hush fell over the crowd. For a moment, all eyes were on her. Whispers rippled through the room as people turned to stare. Emily's heart swelled. This was it. This was the moment she'd dreamed of. Ryan was the first to approach her, his usual confident grin faltering slightly as he reached out a hand. The two of them danced, her dress spinning around her like a midnight sky. It was perfect, too perfect. As the night went on, strange things began to happen. The gym seemed colder than it should have been, the fairy lights flickering as if struggling to stay lit. Some students muttered about hearing faint whispers, like voices carried on an unseen wind. When Emily looked in the mirrors lining the hallways, her reflection seemed wrong. It moved a half-second too slow, and her face held an expression she didn't recognize. A sly, knowing smirk that vanished the moment she blinked. It happened during the announcement of prom queen. Emily was one of the nominees. Her name echoed through the gymnasium as the principal announced it, and the crowd erupted into applause. She stepped forward, her heart pounding. As the crown was placed on her head, a sudden dizziness overtook her. The world spun, and she stumbled back, clutching her chest. The whispers she'd heard in her dreams roared in her ears now, a cacophony of voices speaking in a language she couldn't understand. Her hands flew to her throat as the dress tightened around her body. The fabric constricted like living vines, pressing against her ribs, her arms, her neck. She gasped for air, her vision swimming with spots of light. The crowd froze, unsure if this was part of the spectacle. Then someone screamed. The embroidered stars on the dress began to glow, pulsing like a heartbeat. Emily's eyes turned glassy, her body jerking like a puppet on strings. From her lips came a voice that wasn't hers, a guttural, inhuman wail that sent students scrambling for the exits. Emily collapsed to her knees, her body trembling. The whispers reached a fever pitch, and the air in the gym grew heavy and still. Those who hadn't fled watched in horror as the dress seemed to devour her. Her reflection, visible in the mirror-lined walls, didn't mimic her collapse. Instead, it stood tall, staring down at her with glowing eyes and a wicked grin. As Emily's body crumpled, the reflection stepped forward, pressing its hands against the glass as though trying to break free. With a final, piercing scream, the dress tightened one last time. Emily's body went limp, her lifeless form slumping to the floor. The glow from the dress faded, and the gym fell silent. By the time the paramedics arrived, there was nothing to be done. The dress hung loosely on Emily's lifeless body, its midnight blue fabric dull and lifeless. In the days that followed, rumors spread like wildfire. Some said the dress was cursed, that it had claimed other victims in the past. Others whispered about the strange figure seen in the mirrors that night, a figure that wasn't Emily. The dress vanished after the incident. Some said it disintegrated into ash on the gym floor. Others believed it was taken by someone brave or foolish enough to touch it. Emily's death became the stuff of local legend, her story told in hushed tones at sleepovers and around campfires. But those who were there that night, those who heard the whispers and saw the reflections that moved on their own, never spoke of it again. They knew better. The air in the gym felt heavy, humid with the residue of decades-old sweat and the faint scent of varnished wood. Alex had been coming here since they were a kid, but tonight the place felt different. They could feel it the moment they stepped onto the court. Something underneath the usual creaks and echoes, like the building itself was holding its breath. Last game of senior year, Alex muttered under their breath, shooting a basket that missed by a mile. It didn't matter. Jamie was on the bleachers scrolling through their phone, and Danny was setting up her camera in the corner, muttering about lighting. Liam was dribbling theatrically, mimicking pro players. Only Priya stood still, her gaze locked on the far corner of the gym. She always seemed to pick up on things Alex couldn't, though she never said much about it. The school, once a proud monument to the town's heyday, was now mostly ignored. A relic of a time when factories ran and families stayed. Alex had spent countless hours here, hoping to outrun the whispers of their own restlessness, the ones that told them they were destined to leave this place behind. But tonight, even their wanderlust seemed muted, overtaken by the gym's unsettling silence. Then came the crash. It was Liam, of course, stumbling theatrically into the court's far side. He had missed a layup, lost his footing, and fallen hard. But what caught everyone's attention wasn't the fall. It was the hollow sound that followed, the kind of noise that suggested something underneath the floor wasn't as solid as it should be. Everyone froze. Even Danny looked up from her camera. "What did you do?" Alex's voice echoed, half joking. But Liam had already rolled onto his side, peering curiously at the cracked plank beneath him. Jamie was the first to step closer, their skepticism more of a shield than a personality trait. It's just old wood, probably hollow. Nothing creepy about it. But as they all gathered around, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was about to unravel something they couldn't stop. Liam was already yanking at the plank, revealing a hidden trapdoor. Its rusted hinges groaned as he pried it open, revealing a dark, gaping void beneath the gym floor. "You've got to be kidding me," Danny whispered, her camera suddenly aimed at the opening. She always loved a good story, and Alex could almost hear her inner monologue spinning into overdrive. Forgotten chamber beneath a haunted school. True crime potential. Jamie backed away, muttering, "This is a bad idea. Someone's gonna get tetanus. Or worse." But Alex felt it. That pull, that magnetic urge to know what was down there. The darkness below seemed alive, whispering promises only they could hear. Before they knew it, they were climbing down. The chamber beneath the gym wasn't as spacious as Alex expected, but it felt far older than the building above it. The walls were stone, slick with mildew, and marked with strange, almost ritualistic symbols. There were remnants of furniture. An ancient chair reduced to splinters, a wooden table warped and rotting, and in the center of it all sat a box. It was small, no bigger than a shoebox, and wrapped in rusted chains. Every link seemed carved with intricate, indecipherable designs. Something about it was wrong. Danny had climbed down behind Alex, her camera's red recording light glowing faintly in the gloom. She knelt, brushing away cobwebs to inspect the box closer. "This is old. Like, really old," she murmured. But the rest of her words were drowned out by a sound. A low, almost imperceptible hum that seemed to come from the box itself. Jamie refused to descend, calling down warnings about mold spores and unstable floors. Priya stood at the trapdoor's edge, peering down but refusing to join them. And Liam, ever impulsive, reached for the box before anyone could stop him. The hum grew louder, transforming into something more visceral, almost like a heartbeat. Alex felt it in their chest, their pulse quickening in tandem. They didn't know what was happening, but every instinct screamed at them to leave. "Guys," Alex said, their voice unsteady, "we need to get out of here." For once, no one argued. They climbed out one by one, the box left untouched. But as Alex pulled themselves back into the gym, they couldn't shake the sensation that something had followed them out. By the time they closed the trapdoor, the gym was colder. The lights flickered, though none of them spoke of it. Danny packed up her camera, muttering excuses about editing later. Jamie announced they were done and headed out to the parking lot. Liam, unbothered, dribbled a basketball lazily, while Priya stood by the exit, staring back at the court like she expected it to change. But the whispers started before Alex even reached the door. It was faint at first, like wind rustling through leaves, except there were no leaves in the gym. Then came the footprints. Bare and damp, they materialized one by one on the gym floor, trailing from the trapdoor toward the group. Alex stopped mid-step, frozen, their breath hitching. Danny caught it too, her camera instinctively snapping up to record. "Did you see?" Danny began, but her voice died as one of the gym lights shattered overhead. Glass rained down in shards, and for a split second, Alex thought they saw something. A shadow, impossibly tall and thin, standing just beyond the court's edge. "Run," Alex whispered, and this time, no one argued. Danny spent the next day poring over the fragmented journal they had retrieved from the chamber. The brittle pages hinted at something monstrous. A force bound beneath the school since its construction in the 1940s. The notes grew increasingly erratic toward the end, scrawled warnings overlapping one another in desperate handwriting. "Do not disturb the box. Do not break the seal." As Danny pieced this together, the others faced their own growing unease. Shadows gathered in corners where they shouldn't exist, slipping away when looked at directly. Jamie woke drenched in sweat from dreams that seemed too vivid, too specific, to be their own. Liam found himself unable to escape the sensation of being watched, even in the crowded cafeteria. Priya, ever quiet, began to drift into an unnatural calm, her silences punctuated by moments of sudden, eerie clarity. The group's trust began to splinter. Alex, frustrated by Jamie's constant skepticism, pushed for a plan, any plan. Jamie countered, insisting they couldn't fix anything and should tell an adult. Priya, increasingly distant, offered no opinions, while Liam wavered between bravado and visible terror. The tension only deepened when Alex woke one night to find the box at the foot of their bed. Its lid cracked open. Inside lay something pulsing faintly, a ritualistic object that seemed to hum with malevolent energy. By the time they regrouped, Danny had uncovered a disturbing local legend. In the 1940s, shortly after the school's construction, a string of students vanished without explanation. The disappearances stopped abruptly after the chamber was built. The journal hinted at a ritual to bind an entity, but its final pages were torn away. What was clear was this: the seal fed on division, and its strength faltered when trust broke. But the group's unity was already crumbling. The entity struck with precision, preying on their guilt and fear. Liam began seeing figures at the edges of his vision, always lurking just beyond reach. Danny's meticulous notes were reduced to gibberish overnight, pages upon pages of her handwriting warped into nonsensical spirals. Jamie found themselves wandering, waking in strange places with no memory of how they got there. And Priya became something else entirely. The calm she had exuded curdled into detachment, her movements almost mechanical. Her eyes would linger too long on nothing, her head tilting as though listening to whispers no one else could hear. When Priya suggested returning the box to the chamber, the others hesitated. She claimed to have deciphered the ritual, her voice steady and her logic unassailable. Alex resisted but was too exhausted to argue further. The others followed reluctantly, Danny clutching the box as though it might explode in her hands. Underground, the chamber felt alive, the air vibrating with a malignant energy. The walls dripped with something black and oily, the symbols etched into the stone glowing faintly. As Danny placed the box back on the table, Priya stepped forward, her movements fluid yet alien. The trap was sprung. Priya turned to them, her face a mask of malice, her voice layered with something ancient. Before anyone could react, she lunged, her strength unnatural, pinning Alex to the ground. Jamie and Liam scrambled to pull her off, but the entity in Priya laughed, a guttural, inhuman sound that filled the chamber. In the chaos, Jamie shoved Priya aside, but the motion sent Alex sprawling, their heads striking the edge of the table. Blood smeared the chamber floor. The shadows in the room seemed to converge, their laughter reverberating like thunder. In the dim light, Alex met Danny's horrified gaze. They saw the realization in her eyes, the pieces of the ritual falling into place too late. The chamber wasn't a prison for the entity. It was a trap for its victims. The ritual didn't bind the entity. It required a host. And now it was Alex. The others could only watch as Alex dragged themselves to the box. The artifact within glowed brighter, the chamber trembling as though the entity itself was desperate to escape. With trembling hands, Alex lifted the object and pressed it to their chest. The ritual was complete in moments. Alex collapsed, their bodies slack, the glow from the artifact extinguished. The shadows retreated, their laughter fading into silence. Priya crumpled to the floor, gasping as though waking from a nightmare. But the entity wasn't gone. It wasn't trapped either. As the group fled the chamber, carrying Alex's lifeless body, the truth began to unravel. The entity had never fed on fear alone. It thrived on memory, on the echoes of trauma and loss it left behind. Alex wasn't just gone. They were a tether, ensuring the entity's presence would never truly fade. The chamber was sealed, the box buried deep beneath rubble. The group vowed never to speak of what had happened, but the memory clung to them like a shadow. Years later, the school gym was demolished, its ruins forgotten by most. But in the quiet of the town's Memorial Park, a plaque stood in Alex's honor. Gone but not forgotten. And if you looked closely, in the polished surface of the plaque, you might see a faint reflection. A pair of eyes watching, waiting for someone to disturb the box once more.